This is Jill Wine-Banks. She was a prosecutor during the Watergate case, and she was speaking on MSNBC. And Paul, I want you to hear what she compared Monday's moment of Trump doubting U.S. intelligence agencies to. This is what she said.
It's just as serious to me as the Cuban Missile Crisis in terms of an attack or the 9/11 attack. The president is taking the side of the people who attacked us instead of trying to prevent a future attack. He has done nothing to make sure that the elections 4 months away are going to be safe. And I would say that his performance today will live in infamy as much as the Pearl Harbor attack or Kristallnacht. And it's really a serious issue that we need to deal with.
I missed who was that?
That was Jill Wine-Banks. She is now an MSNBC analyst, but she was a prosecutor in the Watergate case against Nixon. So we have 9/11, we have Pearl Harbor, and we've heard that before. That's not novel to her. Many people have adopted that, pundits across the spectrum, lawmakers. But what I hadn't heard yet in all these historical analogs that have been invoked to talk about alleged Russian email hacking, hacking of the DNC and juvenile social media ads and alleged bots, is Kristallnacht, the 1938 pogrom in Germany by the Nazis against Jews. So her saying that Trump questioning U.S. intelligence agencies will take its place in history alongside Kristallnacht. Paul J.
Well, what can you say? The level of idiocy that we're hearing on corporate news. I mean, she's beyond idiotic. I'm actually, if one's going to be concerned about this stuff, more concerned of what you showed earlier, what's coming out of the mouths of supposed journalists that are supposedly rational. I mean, she's a nutcase. So I would, sometimes when they assess a measure of things, they take people off the extreme on one side, takes people off the extreme on the other, and measure the middle. So I wouldn't even count her. She's just too nuts. But the whole level of rhetoric, we need to try to understand better why it's at such a crazy fervor, and it's a convergence of interests here that are converging on anti-Trump. Now, let me first of all say, I welcome all of it in a sense. I don't like all the crazy propaganda about American democracy, which doesn't exist in the way they talk about it. The anti-Russia stuff is dangerous because the two nuclear powers. But the fact that the American government, the state, is so dysfunctional, and that this Trump administration is so relatively paralyzed by all this is a good thing. I like when they all fight with each other. I just don't think we, as rational people, should buy into the rhetoric and BS on any of the sides of this. And we need to help, as the Real News, our job is to help make realistic sense of this so ordinary people don't get fooled by it so easily. To compare this to anything at the level of war, Pearl Harbors and all this, it's just inflammatory for nothing.
All right, Paul, so let me go to some questions for you, because I have some questions about this issue. And this speaks to what's going on the left right now, because this issue has become very divisive on the left. I personally saw on my Twitter feed many people who I really respect parroting or echoing the lines of others that Trump's comments doubting U.S. intelligence agencies were treasonous, and using that kind of language. And we're seeing a real split right now. So let me read you a few viewer comments. Christian DeVries writes, Paul, why do you think and I love this question, by the way, because I think it points out that we've been the exception. Why do you think progressive online media outlets are not questioning Russiagate? Except for the Real News, I should add, Christian. And Dave Rubin writes, Paul, I've actually been accused of treason by left-wing family members for voicing similar lines of argument. This Russia stuff is totally stifling. How do we combat this? And finally, Carlo Mando writes, why does pointing out that current liberals are hypocrites automatically make the person pointing these things out a Trump supporter?
The Cold War, the McCarthyite period, the House of Un-American Activities Committee coming out of World War II is deep in the American psyche. United States coming out of World War II, soldiers coming back, especially black soldiers, but poor working class soldiers that went to fight against fascism and fight for democracy, came home and they said, we want some of that democracy and freedom. Because, coming out of the crisis of the 30s, the amount of attacks on unionization, the denial of people's democratic rights, and then now they're asked to go fight for all of this. And it's similar asking what Martin Luther King pointed out. You're asking poor white and black soldiers to go to Vietnam and fight for ideals they never see at home. So coming out of World War II, United States and American people were very poised for quite a radical move. And politically, the person that most represented that was Vice President Henry Wallace, Roosevelt's vice president, that had a progressive agenda, both economically and geopolitically, that is far to the left of Bernie Sanders. And he was vice president. Well, he gets overthrown in the Democratic Party convention in, I guess it's 45, and he gets replaced with Truman. And this, what follows is an attempt to undo the strength and influence of progressive public opinion in the United States. In Hollywood, in the unions, amongst teachers, in the government, a massive purge takes place. Thousands and thousands of people are fired for what they believe, not because they're doing anything that harms America, quite the contrary. It was a political, ideological terror campaign. And then, of course, the media is all in on this. Even after the downfall of McCarthy, I remember growing up, I used to see shows on TV, I was a communist for the FBI. The specter of the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. It's deep, deep in the American culture and psyche. So even when the Soviet Union collapses, because this was supposedly about godless communism, well, now you've got Christian capitalism, and they're carrying on exactly the same way. So now you got to wonder, what was this really all about? And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It goes about a narrative needed by the military-industrial complex to spend $1 trillion a year on arms, the regional politics, and so on. It never was about what they said it was about. So I may have lost a little bit of train for what your question was, but the fear of the Russians, the idea that the Russians are this existential enemy out there coming to get us, this is what the liberals, the Rachel Maddows, are playing on. That whole establishment that's supposedly progressive are hearkening up a nightmare of the past that still lives in people's brains.
Paul, I'm reminded, as you say, talking about Rachel Maddow and progressive, in one of the first segments we did, I'd written a piece about Rachel Maddow, just critiquing her coverage. This is over a year ago. And you and I had a little tiff over whether or not we can call Rachel Maddow progressive. I argued, yes, we can. You argued, definitely not. After more than a year later, I totally concede that argument. You were 100% right. She has been. I
hope someone out there is writing down. Aaron actually said Paul's 100% right about something.
Oh yes.
People don't know how much we argue behind the scenes. We probably should do that more on camera.
Yes, it'd be more productive for everybody. Or not, actually. I don't know if people want to see us arguing. But, and you have many viewers, Paul, by the way, who are echoing what you're saying here about a distraction from the real issues and needing an enemy. Max writes, isn't Trump the best distraction while we're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction, absurd wealth equality, on the brink of financial collapse, and close to nuclear war? Liberals are upholding the institutions of our oppression and scapegoating Trump.
It's more complicated than that. If
Wesley, in Max's defense, he only has an internet field to write his comment. I mean, certainly. Yeah.
I would just say that Trump is not there as some deliberate distraction. He is, but Trump, the most important thing, and this is what doesn't get talked about enough everywhere, is we got to understand the underlying systemic reasons the political culture is in such decay. And the underlying issue has to do with the amount of wealth that's been transferred to so few hands and how parasitical it is. That wealth is not generating new production, new productive investment. That so much of the global wealth, something like, I think I said this before, the amount of money available for investment and speculation is something like $350 trillion when the global GDP is only $80 trillion. When you have the stage of capitalism of such parasitism, the politics reflects it. And Obama was this wonderful, charming, smiling face of the same decaying system. I mean, who does he appoint as his financial team? Obama, first thing he does is brings around him all the moguls of Wall Street who managed the 07-08 financial crisis in a way to make sure Wall Street comes out like bandits, and they are bandits. And so, but the point is the system itself is decaying, and we better recognize we're into a new phase of this system. And I keep harping on this. Imagine a system facing this apocalyptic crisis of climate change, and no one even talks about it. Like nobody. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody, obviously, there's activists and all that, but I mean in terms of mainstream media, mainstream politics, it's barely recognizable on the agenda of things that matter. This is a sign of decay and not just about Trump.
Right, and so, Paul, it's interesting. You mentioned Obama. Yesterday, he gave this major speech at the Mandela Lecture where he criticized corporate globalization and talked about massive economic inequality and got a lot of attention for it. One of his comments was, there has been an explosion in economic inequality. A few dozen individuals control the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of humanity. That's not an exaggeration. That's a statistic. Think about that. That was Obama. And then, so the Twitter user...
Something he greatly contributed to.
Well, exactly. So the Twitter user, Pretty Bad Lefty, who I recommend people check out, is very good. He tweeted that and he wrote, "Damn, if only this dude had been in a position of power for almost a decade."